This is also a time of change for my family.
The room fell silent before Princess Anne said a single word. Camilla was seated at the head of the royal family council table, prepared to lead a meeting that could reshape the future of the monarchy. Then Anne stepped forward, lifted the Queen Consort's engraved nameplate, and placed it directly in front of King Charles. Camilla froze. Charles stared at his sister in disbelief. With one deliberate act, Anne had challenged the balance of power inside the crown. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew everyone in that chamber understood the danger. The emergency gathering at Windsor Castle included William, Catherine, Edward, Sophie, and senior household officials, summoned to approve new ceremonial duties for the next generation. The Royal Family Council was a private meeting where senior royals settled internal responsibilities before they became public. Yet it had barely begun before its authority was torn apart. Camilla had grown more powerful inside those discussions because the king had been conserving his energy and passing household duties to trusted hands. She had used that access to guide schedules, shape ceremonial plans, and influence which relatives stood closest to the crown. Anne had watched in silence, but her concern hardened when one decision reached Princess Charlotte. Anne kept her voice level as she declared that the Queen Consort was suspended from chairing council meetings until an order reducing Charlotte's future ceremonial role was withdrawn and investigated. Camilla's expression tightened. She asked whether the Princess Royal understood whom she was addressing. Anne replied that she understood perfectly, and rank did not erase responsibility. William leaned forward as the truth struck him. Instructions prepared through Camilla's office had reassigned part of his daughter's future role to another branch of the family. Catherine remained still beside him, but the pain in her face revealed how deeply the decision had landed. Charles gripped the arms of his chair. Anne had given him no private warning, yet he knew his sister would never risk such a confrontation without proof. Then she placed a sealed red folder beside the removed nameplate. Anne told him the contents showed his approval had never been properly given, even though his signature appeared on a summary page. Camilla reached for the folder. Anne covered it with one hand and said, "The king must read it first." Charles looked at his wife, then at his sister, and did not move. The disputed order was not the beginning of the conflict. It was the final move in a struggle building for months, and understanding it meant uncovering everything everyone around that table stood to lose. For Charles, the confrontation was not simply about protocol. It was about the two women who represented entirely different parts of his life. Camilla had stood beside him through scandal, rejection, and the burden of the crown. Anne had protected the monarchy since childhood without demanding praise or affection. Now one accused the other of crossing an unforgivable line, and the king could no longer protect both without betraying one. Charles had always believed Camilla understood the fears he could never share publicly. She knew the weight of his crown, the loneliness behind official smiles, and the private exhaustion that followed every decision. As Queen Consort, the sovereign spouse who supports the monarch without holding the crown's ruling authority, she had become his emotional shelter during the hardest period of his reign. Anne represented something entirely different. She had spent her life protecting the institution, often without warmth, praise, or reward. The Princess Royal, a special title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, had never confused loyalty with silence. Her brother trusted her because she spoke when everyone else lowered their eyes. Charles still felt wounded. Anne had challenged Camilla in front of the family council instead of coming to him alone, and that choice made his authority look dangerously exposed. His shock was turning into anger, not because he believed his sister was wrong, but because she had forced him to face the accusation before he was emotionally ready. Camilla sat rigidly in a private side room when Charles entered. She did not ask about the folder. She asked why he had allowed Anne to humiliate her without saying a word. The Queen Consort told him his silence had hurt more than the accusation, because it made everyone believe he doubted her. Charles closed the door and tried to defend Anne's years of service. He reminded his wife that his sister would never act carelessly. Then Camilla looked directly at him and asked whether he still trusted her. The king opened his mouth, but no answer came. William stood near the council room door with the disputed summary still in his hand. He was furious that Charlotte's future had been discussed without him or Catherine. Yet the prince also knew that openly supporting Anne could deepen the growing distance between him and his father. Catherine read the wording again and felt something colder than anger. The phrase, "within manageable boundaries," had been used by Camilla during a private conversation about younger royals. Now the same words appeared inside the order. That made the change look planned, not accidental. William folded the page sharply when he reached the line calling Charlotte ceremonially non-essential. Sophie then approached Anne and quietly revealed, through a documented briefing note, that Camilla's office had been speaking with palace planners for weeks. The real cause of Anne's intervention was no longer hidden. It began at one private ceremony, where suspicion became certainty and silence became impossible. The crisis began during what should have been a harmless rehearsal. There were no cameras, no public audience, and no reason for alarm. Princess Charlotte had been invited to practice a symbolic role beside her father at an upcoming national service. But when the young royal arrived, her place had vanished, her instructions had been rewritten, and Camilla's private secretary was waiting with a replacement plan. Anne witnessed the moment and never forgot Charlotte's face. Charlotte had prepared for weeks with William and Catherine before the closed rehearsal at St. George's Chapel. The Commonwealth Thanksgiving service was a national ceremony bringing together royal duty, faith, and public service. And her place beside the prince was meant to show that the next generation was learning responsibility without being pushed too quickly. William expected a simple final practice. Catherine expected reassurance. Instead, an attendant handed them a revised procession card with Charlotte's name removed. The change was presented as an order approved by Charles, supposedly created to protect younger royals from pressure. No one challenged it immediately because the king's name appeared at the top. Charlotte tried to stay calm, but her voice dropped when she asked Catherine whether she had done something wrong. The princess answered at once, telling her daughter she had done nothing to deserve this. Yet her anger was impossible to hide, because the decision had been made without either parent being consulted. Anne arrived as Camilla's private secretary directed attendants to move an older relative into the empty position. The Princess Royal, the special title traditionally held by the monarch's eldest daughter, watched the confusion for only a few seconds before walking directly toward Charlotte. Anne lowered herself slightly and met the child's eyes. "You have done nothing wrong," she said. Then she rose, took the revised card from the secretary's hand, and demanded to know who had ordered the change. The secretary answered that the instruction came from Charles. Anne contacted her brother later through a recorded private call and read the exact wording aloud. The king immediately denied approving Charlotte's removal. He had agreed only to shorten the procession, not to erase her role. Sophie then helped Anne compare the monarch's original note with the final order. The trusted confidant found a paragraph added after Charles had reviewed the plan. A documented briefing trail showed that the new wording had passed through Camilla's office. Anne understood the danger at once. This was not merely one child losing one place. The altered order could become a precedent, slowly weakening Charlotte's position while increasing the Queen Consort's control over future royal planning. That evening, Anne sat alone with both versions. She circled the inserted paragraph, set down her pen, and prepared the red folder. Camilla learned about the challenge before the emergency meeting began. She entered ready for resistance, but she was not ready for Anne to confront her face-to-face. When the council meeting resumed, Camilla expected Charles to restore order and return her nameplate. Instead, the king asked Anne to explain the evidence. The Princess Royal opened the red folder, placed two versions of the same instruction side by side, and turned toward the Queen Consort. Her voice remained calm, but every word struck with force. "You did not advise the king," she said. "You used his name to create an authority he never gave you." Charles sat at the head of the table, while Camilla's nameplate remained in front of him. The Royal Family Council was the private body where senior royals settled internal duties before those decisions reached the public. Its authority depended on trust, because one false instruction could reshape roles across the entire monarchy. Anne explained that a consort could advise, support, and influence, but could not turn a general instruction into a binding order affecting the direct line of succession. The Queen Consort listened without blinking. Then she accused her of turning an administrative dispute into a personal attack. Camilla insisted Charlotte had been protected from pressure, not punished. She said the change was temporary and responsible. Catherine answered that real protection would have involved speaking to the child's parents. Her voice tightened when she repeated the question her daughter had asked in the chapel. "Did I do something wrong?" Camilla pushed back her chair and rose. Anne remained seated for several seconds, then stood slowly and met her gaze across the table. Neither woman looked toward Charles. Neither asked for permission. Anne opened a documented circulation record and revealed that the altered instruction had been sent to 3 palace departments before the king ever saw the final version. She then produced a planning memo showing that Camilla's private office had requested the wording become a template for future ceremonies. William leaned forward and asked whether other decisions had been changed in the same way. A senior official searched through the files, then admitted he could not answer. The prince's anger deepened, because Charlotte's removal might not have been an isolated act. Charles lifted both documents and compared them line by line. His face changed when he saw his handwritten note attached to language he had never approved. The monarch finally understood why Anne had refused to warn him privately. She feared the evidence would disappear before the meeting began. Anne turned back toward Camilla and formally declared that she could not preside over the council while the review remained active. Then she placed one hand on the engraved nameplate and turned it face down. The room went silent. Charles now faced the decision he had tried to avoid. Either his sister had crossed the limits of her power, or his wife had already crossed hers. The confrontation had exposed the betrayal, but the next battle would decide whether Anne possessed enough authority to make the suspension stand. Anne's act appeared spontaneous, but it had been built on something stronger than anger. She knew the council's rules, the limits of a consort's influence, and the emergency authority available to senior working royals when the sovereign's approval was misrepresented. Charles could overturn her decision, yet doing so before examining the evidence would place his own credibility at risk. For the first time that evening, the king realized his sister had left him only one responsible choice. Anne's standing came from decades of service, and from her position as Princess Royal, the title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter. More importantly, Charles had once authorized her to intervene when household procedure threatened the stability of the crown. That decision, signed during an earlier restructuring, now stood directly in front of him. Anne had not tried to remove Camilla as Queen Consort. She had done something narrower, but still devastating. The Queen would keep her title and public role, yet she would lose control over private council meetings and ceremonial planning while the investigation continued. Charles felt trapped. Supporting his sister would look like a betrayal of his wife. Rejecting her decision would suggest that personal loyalty mattered more than the truth behind his own commands. Either choice carried pain, but only one protected the authority of the crown. Camilla confronted him privately before he left the chamber. She warned that allowing the suspension to remain would destroy her standing inside the household. Charles answered that using his name without full permission had already endangered that standing. The Queen stared at him, realizing he was no longer speaking as a husband alone. Charles later sat by himself in his study. He removed his glasses, read Anne's authority letter again, and placed it beside the altered instruction. The king remained silent as the clock struck the hour, because every line confirmed the same brutal fact. His sister had acted under rules he had approved. Edward then confirmed through a documented household record that Anne's intervention followed those emergency rules exactly. He explained that senior working royals could freeze disputed instructions when the sovereign's authority appeared to have been misused. Sophie added something worse. In a recorded briefing account, she revealed that 2 aides had warned Camilla's office the wording required fresh approval. Their objections were dismissed. The change was not innocent. William finally declared that he supported an independent review. The prince also refused to let Charlotte attend any event controlled by the disputed planning team. Charles picked up his pen and signed a temporary directive confirming Anne's suspension for 72 hours. The review began immediately. The king's signature did not end the conflict. It sent fear through every corridor, and the first discovery showed that Camilla's authority was already collapsing far beyond the council chamber. By the next morning, nothing about Camilla's position looked the same. Meetings were reassigned. Instructions were returned unanswered. Aides who once entered her office without hesitation now waited for written approval from Anne's review team. The Queen Consort remained inside her private sitting room as the machinery she had directed moved beyond her reach. For the first time since entering the heart of royal life, Camilla understood how quickly influence could vanish without a single public announcement. Camilla's ceremonial staff were placed under temporary supervision, pending orders were frozen, and Anne assumed control of the next council agenda. The review team was a temporary group examining whether palace decisions had been issued with proper authority. Its work mattered because one altered instruction could damage trust across the entire royal household. Charles tightened the rules immediately. No decision carrying his name could now leave the palace without direct confirmation from his principal private secretary, the senior official responsible for checking and delivering the king's formal instructions. The monarch knew this protected the crown, but it also made his judgment of Camilla impossible to hide. Camilla felt abandoned. She had expected him to reverse Anne's action once the first shock passed, yet his silence became a verdict delivered behind closed doors. The Queen believed every unanswered call and reassigned meeting told the household that her husband no longer trusted her. Charles entered her sitting room carrying both guilt and anger. He wanted to comfort his wife, but new altered instructions had already appeared during the investigation. The king could not offer reassurance without pretending the evidence meant nothing. Camilla sat before untouched tea when her private secretary delivered the next blow. She would not attend the coming planning meeting. The Queen removed her reading glasses and asked whether the order had come from Anne or Charles. The secretary answered quietly, "It came from both." Charles had extended the suspension until the full review was complete. Investigators had also discovered a second proposal, limiting Catherine's power to approve appearances involving George, Charlotte, and Louis. It had never taken effect, but its wording closely matched the order used to remove Charlotte. Catherine read the proposal with William beside her. The princess did not raise her voice. She became completely still as she understood that all 3 children could have been affected. William watched her silence harden into resolve. Camilla's closest senior aide then resigned from the planning committee through a written statement, declaring that the office could no longer defend decisions issued without complete royal approval. The resignation left the Queen more isolated than before. Charles finally sent Anne a private request. He wanted to meet alone, without advisors, aides, or Camilla. The palace had chosen procedure over protection. Now the family's fate rested on a conversation between a brother and sister who had never faced stakes this personal. There were no secretaries in the room, no council papers arranged for performance, and no royal audience waiting beyond the door. Charles asked Anne to meet him in the small library where they had spoken privately since youth. For several moments, neither mentioned Camilla. Then the king asked the question he had avoided since the nameplate was removed. Had Anne acted to protect the monarchy, or had she finally decided that his wife would never truly belong within it? Charles carried the weight of the review into that room. Several examples of unauthorized wording had now been uncovered, although only Charlotte's removal had actually been carried out. The direct heirs were the family members closest in line to inherit the throne, which meant any hidden change affecting them could shape the monarchy's future. Anne listened as her brother spoke about loyalty. He had always protected people, even when they disappointed him. She had always protected the duty attached to their positions, even when doing so caused pain. Their differences had once balanced each other. Now they had brought them to the edge of a family break. Charles accused his sister of humiliating Camilla when a private warning might have been enough. Anne answered that warnings had already been given. Through 2 documented messages, aides had told the Queen Consort that the king had not approved Charlotte's removal. Both warnings were ignored. Anne admitted she knew the Nameplate Act would wound him. Her voice softened as she explained that silence would have hurt him more. If his name could be used without consent, then every order he gave would become open to doubt. Charles turned away and rested one hand against the fireplace. Anne did not move toward him. She allowed the silence to remain until he finally asked whether Charlotte had cried during the rehearsal. Anne answered carefully. The child had held herself together in front of the attendants, but she had cried later when she was alone with Catherine. Charles closed his eyes. For the first time, the king understood the human cost hidden beneath the polite phrase, ceremonial adjustment. Anne then revealed the final truth through a recorded account from the planning office. Camilla had been informed twice that Charles had approved only a shorter procession, not Charlotte's removal. The Queen Consort had not misunderstood him. She had continued after the truth was made clear. Charles accepted what he had resisted. The suspension was justified. He asked Anne to help him create a permanent boundary, separating Camilla's supporting role from decisions affecting William, Catherine, and their children. Anne told him she had never tried to remove his wife from his life. She had acted to stop his private loyalty from becoming the monarchy's weakness. Brother and sister finally understood each other. But Charles now had to face Camilla alone, and within hours, the country would learn that her royal authority had been formally reduced. The palace hoped to release a restrained statement about revised household responsibilities. Instead, one image defined the entire story. Camilla's engraved council nameplate, lying face down beside the king's red folder. By sunrise, broadcasters were describing Anne's intervention as the strongest internal challenge of Charles's reign. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace. Newspaper presses ran late editions, and one question dominated every conversation. Had the Princess Royal just saved the king from his own household? Buckingham Palace confirmed that Camilla would no longer chair meetings involving succession planning, the Wales children, or future ceremonial duties. Succession planning meant the private decisions shaping how the next generation prepared for the throne. The Queen Consort would keep her title and continue supporting Charles, but she would no longer control those sensitive discussions. Charles also approved a new rule requiring joint consent from the sovereign and William before any decision affecting the direct line could move forward. The direct line meant the closest family members expected to inherit the crown. That change protected George, Charlotte, and Louis from private orders issued without their parents' knowledge. Anne's supporters praised her for defending accountability. Her critics accused her of weakening Camilla and embarrassing the king before the entire country. The Princess Royal remained silent, but the documented palace statement made clear that her intervention had exposed a real failure. Charles faced even harsher questions. Commentators wondered whether he had delayed setting boundaries because he feared returning Camilla to the painful years when the institution and public rejected her. The king's compassion had protected his wife, but it had also allowed her influence to grow unchecked. The front page of the fictional London Herald captured the public mood. Beneath an image of the face-down nameplate, one headline dominated the page: "Anne draws the line." Copies rose above the crowd gathered at Buckingham Palace's gates, as supporters argued with those who believed family loyalty had been betrayed. A veteran royal broadcaster delivered the sharpest verdict during a live evening program. He described Anne's action as not rebellion against the crown, but obedience to its limits. The statement spread quickly because it transformed the scandal from a family feud into a question of duty. Camilla watched the broadcast alone inside Clarence's house. When the nameplate appeared, she switched off the television and remained seated in silence. The Queen understood that the image had already become larger than her explanation. The palace then released the review's final conclusion. Charlotte's removal had never received the King's informed approval, and the proposal limiting Catherine's authority was permanently withdrawn. William and Catherine brought their daughter to the rescheduled rehearsal, where Anne was already waiting. Charles approached Charlotte and told her personally that he had never intended to remove her place. The truth had been restored, but one final decision remained. Charles now had to protect his marriage without ever allowing personal loyalty to weaken the monarchy again. Charles's final decision was not delivered through anger, exile, or revenge. It came through a boundary that should have existed from the beginning. Camilla would remain beside him as Queen Consort, but she would never again control decisions involving William, Catherine, or their children. Anne's suspension became permanent policy. Charlotte's role was restored, and the nameplate that had silenced the room became a reminder that within the monarchy, love could influence the sovereign, but it could not replace accountability. Charles permanently removed Camilla from chairing the royal family council and placed all matters involving succession, ceremonial inheritance, and the Wales children under a new committee led by himself, William, and Anne. The council was the private body that settled major family duties before they became public, which meant this change placed the future of the direct heirs beyond one office's control. Camilla kept her title, charities, public duties, and place beside the king. Yet her private office lost the right to issue instructions in Charles's name, without written confirmation. The Queen Consort remained part of royal life, but the authority she had stretched too far was gone. Charles later admitted in a recorded private conversation that his desire to protect his wife had made him avoid necessary boundaries. He understood too late that clear limits would have protected Camilla from suspicion and protected the crown from misuse. Camilla told him Anne's action had made her feel like an outsider again. The king answered with painful honesty. Belonging could not depend on power that had never been granted. She said nothing, but she understood the verdict. Camilla returned to the council chamber after the final decision and found her nameplate beside Charles rather than at the head of the table. She paused, then took the assigned seat without protest. Anne met her eyes, gave one restrained nod, and opened the meeting by restoring Charlotte's ceremonial position. William and Catherine accepted Charles's apology. The prince and the princess agreed that every future decision involving George, Charlotte, or Louis would be discussed openly with them. No hidden wording, no quiet adjustments, no borrowed authority. Charlotte later took her place beside William at the rescheduled service. The child moved forward with confidence, while Charles watched, knowing exactly what had nearly been removed under his name. Anne's bold act did not destroy a marriage or push Camilla out of royal life. It forced the family to separate personal devotion from constitutional responsibility. The crown survived because someone inside it refused to remain silent when silence became dangerous. Charles was stunned because his sister acted where he had hesitated. Camilla was silenced because the evidence left no defense. Anne prevailed through duty, not ambition, and the monarchy emerged stronger, clearer, and more disciplined than before. There was nothing left unresolved. Anne drew the boundary, Charles accepted the truth, Camilla surrendered the authority she had overreached to claim, and the crown moved forward, under rules no one could quietly rewrite again. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.